I want to get all my documents open and share.
Blanca said hello to you in the chat, so
I,
she must be on.
Hi, Blanca. We're such a small uh, session today. Okay, I need to share. How about this one? Okay, let me move it over here. Oh, it's not working. But do you see documents or do you just see like a drawing of like a villa?
I see Form 1A.
Oh, good. That's perfect. Okay, it is 11:04. I apologize for that. I have, oh, good. Alrighty. So let me just go ahead and get started here. Um, as we know, January 1st, our Northwest MLS and our Washington State Realtors, in conjunction in what is going to happen in June, July, or August, depending on when the final settlement is with NAR, then what they did was they enacted, and we started this last summer, the agreements. We always had the listing agreement, but then we went to the buyer's side. And I just want to remind you that if you're dealing with a buyer and you're showing houses, then you should have been at the point where you gave them the pamphlet and explained agency, and then explained it's the law that you needed to have some form of an agreement. And so, and then the second part of that is once you have them sign it and you're showing houses and everything, it's very, very important that you upload that um, into Command within 2 days of getting it signed. And a real good habit is that when you send a signed copy to your clients, it's a really good time then to send it then and then upload it into Command. And then that way, when they start truly auditing us in July or in August, then we will have that there and it will be within that 2 day time frame. And let's just say that you or showing your buyers a house and you gave them the pamphlet, they initialed it, and then the first house you showed them, they want to buy it. So the most important thing is before you put together an offer is you get that buyer's agreement and sign it. And then another way to protect yourself is when you put your offer together for your buyers is to send that to them by PDF. And then it's going to be very important that you walk them through the document and all the different forms and everything. And then you can set it up in a then assign and make sure that there's a gap there, because if for some reason they came back and they said, look, you sent this to me at 11 o'clock and at 11:05 I was signing the offer. Now, I don't know about you, but it takes a lot longer than 5 minutes for me to be able to go, uh, through an offer. So really protect yourself. Um, Make sure that your correspondence, that you flag it so that you can save it for that particular transaction. And now I believe that you can do that right out of command. I don't know how to do that, but Ashley would be some, if you don't know how to do that, that would be great.
To do what?
To put your emails in and
Oh, yeah,
through command,
yes.
and then that way they're there, and you don't have to download it or what. Ashley really knows. I don't know that part of it. But I just wanted to give everybody a reminder, if you're representing a buyer, you must have an agreement and you must upload it into Command within 2 days of signing. And then also make sure with that agreement, you have the real estate brokerage in Washington pamphlet signed as well. I have been seeing some um, offers come through where they're not the listing broker, but they don't have, but they didn't upload the buyer's agreement. Now, if you were the listing broker, then you must also have a buyer's agreement. And if you're doing a limited dual agency, then you need to make sure that everybody is aware of that. Okay, so what I'm going to cover next is a couple of different scenarios. Um, I'd like to I'd like to go to the one where you're the listing broker and you get a phone call and it's a buyer and they want to see your property. So, what is the very first thing that we ask them? And if okay, so Bianca, if you're there, if you know, and the answer to that is you ask them, are you somebody representing you? So that you find that out immediately if you were the listing broker. And then the second thing that you do is you provide the pamphlet, Real Estate Brokerage in Washington, and you explain to them right now that you have an existing exclusive agreement to represent the buyer. And so then you have a conversation when you're going through that pamphlet and you're explaining that there are two options, or three actually. They can get somebody to represent them. If they would like for you to represent them, then you explain the limited dual agency, and then you'll need to have a form signed to be able to do that. And then you would also have to get agreement with the seller. So that's a little bit tricky. You talk with them. Now, when you list it on the listing agreement that you see here, when you set up the listing, then this is the time when you go over with your client a limited dual agency. And you say, if a buyer contacts me directly, do you have any issues with me doing a limited dual agency, and explain what that is? And if they say, no, I don't have any problem with that, then you're going to get their initials on this form 1A on line 24. If initiated below, seller consents to the listing broker and supervising broker acting as limited dual agents. And remember, it's both your listing and Russ that will be a limited dual agent in the sale of the property to a buyer that listing broker also represents. So you just have that conversation to them and then explain to them that there are a couple of things that you cannot do. And one of them is that you will not share any information. For an example, if a listing broker said, well, gee, I want to get at least $750 for this, but we're going to list it for $799. That's the kind of information you cannot share with your buyer. And if you talk with your buyer and your buyer says, I'm approved up to 780, but if we put in this offer for 750, That's what the approval letter is going to say, but I can go another 30,000 higher. That's information that you're not going to share with the seller. And I've only done that once. For me, it was very uncomfortable. However, when they'd ask me a question, what do you think? Do you think the seller will, or do you think the buyer will? Then what you can, if you know the answer to that, but it's private or privileged information, then you say the best thing we can do is put together an offer and let's see. And so on this one, if you sign it in advance, then you can uh, then go back to them. And then I would do a Form 42 where both the buyer and the seller sign that agency agreement showing that you're going to be representing both of them. And then over here in the compensation, when you talk with them, it says if the buyer is not represented by a buyer brokerage firm, then the listing firm compensation shall be, and then you find out, is it going to be, if you agreed to say $500 and you're going to represent the other one, then you might put in there that it will be $700 or whatever the percentage is on how to deal with that. And then you go on to what is the buyer brokerage compensation, and that's all done in advance. Okay, and I think that is everything on this form that we need. And then remember, I just want to say this one time, when you're doing a Form 1A and it's the seller or seller's signature, please include an email address and a telephone number along with all this information for us, because there may be a time where something happens and you're not reachable, where we can reach the client. It's nobody sees this form. It goes from being signed into command. And so therefore, that's a way for us to be able to get in touch with them. Uh, just a couple of months ago, we had somebody in Mexico, couldn't be reached. Uh, it happened to be the listing broker's mother. And so I finally found a phone number because it wasn't on the contract either. And so I was able to strike a conversation, just call them up and say, I'm a managing member, I work with this broker, and they are out of touch. And then she said, well, yes, that's my daughter. She won't be back until Friday. And this was something that needed to be taken care of that day. So that's why we really want that information there. Um, Now, just going back, you're the listing broker and they don't want you to represent them. They want to represent themselves. So a question. So if they come back and they say, I'm going to represent myself. I understand what it means to be unrepresented. Either I've done a lot of these or I can do it myself. Okay, then we purely go into who's going to write up the offer. The client, the buyer is not going to be able to do that. And so once they fully understand and you've documented this uh, in writing by email, then you're going to be writing up this offer. They may tell you a price that they're going to come in at, but you're going to be writing it up with your client, the seller. Uh, and so do we uh, do we offer them ideas on what forms we're going to use? And the answer to that is no. But we cannot refuse to write up the offer just because they are not represented. So, but you must remember that in writing and as verbally that you follow the same procedure and you explain, okay, you are unrepresented. I'm going to put together this offer, and um, and you can ask them what they want, but you're writing it up that will benefit the seller. And you have no obligation to protect the buyer, but you do have an obligation by law to not refuse to write up the offer. So we can make that be very clear. Uh, Let me see, I already talked about emailing to document that out and ask them, I'm going to send an email explaining this. Can you send me one back that says, I understand this, and but I still do not need to be represented. Uh, okay, and let me see if we go. Um, okay, so that is one scenario, and I just want to make sure that we were all covered on that. And on our team here at Keller Williams, there are people that are co-listing. We don't, as a company, do that often. A lot of times we might do that with a brand new person, but it started to where people co-list. Then the question came up, well, what if we have a buyer come in? Can we um, sever one of those relationships with the seller and then represent the buyer? Now, when I talked about this with Russ yesterday, he said he really would need to be advised of that because that's a very dangerous situation where we sever a relationship, but yet we don't, with one broker as a sub agent, but we don't sever the relationship. And so if we ever do this, and this came out recently on one of the videos that uh, Annie had, I guess on the west side, they're doing that more so they keep everything in-house. And um, so that brings up a question. If we are co-listing, then we need to make sure that we have on our listing agreement, we either have, and let me go back up there. Um, Here's the seller, the firm, the address, and here is the point. We either need to have both brokers listed here, or if you establish the listing and then you're going to be adding somebody else, then we would go to a Form 18 and we would add them to that listing. And agency and co-listing broker firm appoints as a co-listing broker. They're on line 9 to represent the seller with listing broker. And this agreement creates agency relationship with a co-listing broker and any of the firm's managing brokers who supervise the co-listing broker. No other brokers affiliated with the firm are agents. So in our situation, this is Russ's listing, and you would be assigned as the listing broker in your Form 1A. Let me just switch back to that right here. Listing firm appoints to represent the seller. And remember that, Russ, it is just, it, it, if it is a listing or you're representing the seller or the buyer, then he is also representation. Through your agreement, then you've set up this agency relationship. So there are a couple of ways that you can add a person. It's to the original one here, or after it's listed, you can add it. Check 3, put in the additional person's listing. Okay, So the next thing that I want to talk about is if you have a licensed broker that is assisting you in possibly like a transaction file as a transaction coordinator, and they're going to be doing the licensed work for you, then you need to include them in your listing. And you would include them up here uh, look, as a co-listing, and you would add it on the Form 18. Or if you are representing a buyer and you're had to be called away and you need to have somebody come out and help with this while you're gone, then, or they're going to help you through the transaction, you must be identified with the client as a sub-agent of the broker, of the brokerage, and it must be signed and agreed to. Does that, am I making sense here? Anytime you have a question, Blanca, please don't hesitate to ask. Right now, it's just you and me on here. Okay, so let's say at the very beginning, Blanca, for the first few times you are working as with Ashley. And so you're going to, if you're working with a buyer's agreement and you bring the buyer in, then you're going to have uh, either exclusive or non-exclusive. Exclusive is what we recommend. But if you're working with somebody that uh, doesn't want to be tied down to that right away and just wants to see what's going on, well, then there's nothing wrong with doing a non-exclusive, but just remember they can go to other people as well. And then if you are adding like Ashley's name, or Ashley's adding your name to be able to work with it. And the legal reason for this is that only identified licensed brokers or agents, either through the buyer agreement or the listing agreement, can actually interact for the brokerage and the client with the other side of the deal. If you're working with a listing broker, they may say, "Wow, who's this person? Why are they working with me?" So you will need to make sure that that gets taken care of. Okay, let me just look at my notes here. Okay, if you have any questions on that, and then just in summary, the most important thing is that if you're interfacing with a client, listing agreements are easy to do because for us to be able to list their property, we legally need to have an agreement to be able to do that. And so now that's also happened on the buyer's side. For you legally to be able to work with them, you also have to have a agreement. And then if you're working with another person and they're helping you with this and they're interfacing with your client, then you have to have them identified. Um, there's only one other thing in here that I just want to talk about. If you list somebody and then you want to sever that agency relationship, then on a listing form 18, you would do that. You would click other, and then you would write in there that um, that the broker's name, let's say broker X, will no longer be working with this client and their relationship is severed, agency relationship is severed. And then you would want to be able to have your seller's signature on that with the firm and your signature if you're the listing broker. And if you ever do that to unhook somebody so that they can represent somebody on the other side, then there are two things you have to remember. One of them is that whatever information you've received, either from the seller or the buyer, that is confidential, it, even though you have severed that agency relationship, then it's very important that you protect that private information. And if you, the second part of that is, let's say it's a listing and they have given you a second set of keys, or you're the number that people call if they have any issues. Well, then you need to return the property or information back to them and change that and make sure somebody else is taking care of that. So a little clarification on that. And as I said before, when we sever any relationship, that's a natural trigger that in the notes that go out today, there'll be specific language on how to do that and on what form, but it'll also be that Russ has to be a part of that because it's a very tricky situation to be able to do, and it's not something that I've seen in our practice. The only time is when we release a listing or if somebody leaves and Russ grants that they can take their listing or his listing over to their new company. Okay, um, so that's it. And I hope that that was helpful for you today. And Blanca, I will, uh, unless you have questions, then I think that we are all through. All right, I am going to end the session here, and you guys have a wonderful day. It's supposed to be that magical 75 to 80 degrees. So make it a beautiful one, Blanca. We'll talk to you soon. Alrighty.